I've noticed a disturbing phenomenon that often happens when a victim of abuse tries to speak out and tell the truth about what's going on at home, or when she asks for help and protection or justice from those who are mandated by God to protect her. In public cases such as the recent Stanford University rape case or the mounting accusations against Bill Cosby for sexual abuse, what happens in the public eye is that the victim is repeatedly discredited, scrutinized, and eventually portrayed as the villain. We often hear things like, "Oh, she's lying. She's ruining his life, his career, his ministry, or their family." In the Stanford University rape case that was all over the news last year, the freshman swimming star Brock Allen Turner was found guilty of 3 counts of sexual assault. Yet his father wrote an impassioned letter to the court stating, "Brock's life is ruined. His swimming future forfeited for 20 minutes of action." Notice the twist of language. Brock has now become the victim. In his father's letter, Brock is portrayed as being inexperienced with alcohol and his behavior described as promiscuous rather than abusive. Sympathy was sought for the victimizer, reflected in the sentencing of only 6 months, and turned against the victim, portraying her as the villain who ruined his future. What about her future? If you've paid attention to the unfolding story about Bill Cosby, I hope you've noticed a similar strategy. Initially, most people did not believe the women who accused Cosby of drugging and raping them, even though their stories were eerily similar. People said, "Surely these women are opportunists. They're looking for attention and money from one of America's most beloved icons." The female victims were painted as villains, their lives scrutinized, and Bill Cosby was the victim of their lies and money-grabbing motives. Yet as more and more sordid details come to light, it looks like most people judge these women too harshly. And one woman will have the opportunity to tell her story before a jury as Cosby is finally going to trial. And you can see and read about these cases for yourself by Googling them on the internet, but I share these incidents because I often see the same thing happening with women who seek help from their church leaders for marital abuse. For example, there is the sad and very public story of Nachmed Abedini, who fiercely advocated for 3 years for her husband's release from an Iranian prison. She was Christianity's darling until she exposed that her hero husband, Saeed, had regularly abused her during their marriage. Suddenly, she was no longer Christianity's darling. She was not believed or supported by some very prominent Christian leaders who had been very involved in her crusade to have her husband released. But now, her words were questioned, her mental health and morality suspect. She became the villain, and her spouse, Saeed, looked like the victim of an angry or unstable spouse. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again in my work with women in destructive marriages. Why is it so hard for us as Christian people helpers and leaders to believe her, and so easy for us to dismiss her and make her the villain? Well, I'd be curious to hear your opinions below, but in my experience, there are 3 main reasons why we do this. First, victims are imperfect and sinful. When we look at the Stanford University rape case, we see a woman who drank too much alcohol and left the party highly intoxicated. So what was she thinking? Or we say to ourselves, why would a woman go to Bill Cosby's home and be with him unless she was also guilty of sexual sin? It's all too easy for us to look at the victim's flaws and failures, question her story, and believe those who subtly or boldly discredit her character. For those of us in the church, a female victim slides into the villain role, especially if she's angry, acts a little rough around the edges, or even implements some tough consequences against her husband, such as separation or divorce. She's told, you're the problem here. You have a hard heart. You're unforgiving. You're unrepentant. You're ruining the family. Maybe you're having an affair. You want to break up this home. You've been listening to worldly influences. You're ungodly. You're crazy. You're unsubmissive. You're rebellious. And on and on and on. The second reason we find it so easy to misjudge what's really happening is because the one who's being accused of abuse or serial adultery or other destructive behaviors is often a very charming and convincing liar. He also may hold a position of power in the church or community, and no one could imagine him guilty of the things his wife accuses him of. Or, if the evidence is irrefutable, he now becomes penitent. I'm so sorry for what I've done. And that's supposed to make everything better. And so the church folks rally around the seemingly repentant one, and he now becomes the victim of her hard heart and firm boundaries. And he receives the church's love and support, and she gets shunned and disciplined for not falling into line with what the church leaders think she should do. Even when she tells her church leadership that his innocence or repentance is bogus and his behaviors haven't changed, she's often vilified and discredited. She's told she's judgmental, hard-hearted, lacking grace. Somehow they know him better than she does, even though she's lived with him for years. And the third reason is because we're just uneducated on the dynamics of abusive behaviors and destructive relationships. And let's be honest, sometimes we're just too busy, or maybe even too proud, to really dig deeper to see what's really going on. We're also afraid to do or say anything that would make it look like we are endorsing a marital separation or divorce. So it's just easier to tell the victim to be quiet, forbear, forgive, make the best of things. And when she refuses and gets louder or more demanding for justice, she becomes the villain. In the Bible, there's a horrific story of a victimizer turned victim, and the leaders of Israel fell for his story without investigating what really happened. A Levite husband shoved his concubine wife out the door to an angry crowd to do as they pleased in order to save his own skin. Raped and beaten all night long, she crawled to the doorstep of the house in the early morning, and there she died. And the Levite callously tossed her broken and battered body on his donkey and took her home, and later cut her up into 12 pieces. And he sent one piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel, portraying himself, not his wife, as the victim of a horrible injustice. If you can't believe this story, it's actually in the Bible in Judges 19. And the scary and horrible thing is that the Israelites believed him. As biblical counselors and well-meaning church leaders, let's not get duped. Let's not forget that there are wolves in sheep's clothing that are excellent liars and do a very good job of pretending that they're sheep, when in fact they're wolves. And there are imperfect and sinful people out there who are true victims that we need to believe and protect. I'm so glad that you're on this site. It shows me that you care about people who are true victims and want to help. And so leave a message below on reasons that you think that the church turns the victim into the villain, and how I can help you be a better counselor and advocate for those who need our help.